Everyone to another session at ConCon Virtual 2021. So this time we have a session with Thibault from Matrix, and first Thibault from Matrix, an element. I can hear myself. Bad stuff is happening here. This is what happens when we are live. But never mind. I will deal with. I'm just muting stuff everywhere. There we go. I can't hear anyone anymore, but I can at least concentrate on what I'm saying. Sorry about that, everyone. So yes, today this session I've got with Thibault from Matrix/Element, and they are one of our platinum sponsors. This is what I wanted to say. And I couldn't quite get my words out. So I want to say thank you to all of our sponsors before we get started with this session. So obviously we've got Element and the Matrix Foundation, but we've also got Daily, Subspace, and Mux. They're our platinum sponsors this year. And then our gold sponsors, we've got Toulouse, 100 Milliseconds, and Dite. And then silver sponsors, we've got Lowway, Sangoma, Millercast, and WebRTC Ventures. And then we've got Jambones, Telecurve, and Pion as our community sponsors. And then obviously we've got our fabulous AV partners. Element is one of those AV partners. So we've got PSP, Millercast, Broadcaster, Subspace, Element, Mux, and Meet Echo. Without all of these companies, this couldn't have happened. And all of these companies are the reason why all of this content is completely and utterly free of charge. So make sure you go and speak to them in their sponsor rooms. If they don't have sponsor rooms because they were, say, a silver customer, a silver sponsor, or a community, then yes. Something's gone wrong somewhere, but we shall carry on because YouTube seems to think that we are live. Sorry. Technical hiccups. This is what happens when we are live instead of doing absolutely everything pre-recorded. Anyway, so I'm going to move over and let Thibault do his talk, and then afterwards we'll catch up with Thibault for his Q&A. So over to you, Thibault.
Thank you, Dan, for having us at ComCon. I'll be animating the Matrix 101 session, and as the title says, it's 101. So it's really a gentle introduction to Matrix and how things work from a very high level. It's not going to be a guide on how to hack on Synapse. It will be an interesting talk, but this is definitely not going to be what I'm going to cover. An important disclaimer as well, it's a presentation to give an overview of the things. It's not reference material, so sometimes for educational purposes I make things simpler than they really are. A typical example is when I'm going to talk about power levels to control what people can and cannot do in a room, in a Matrix room. It's not exactly the truth, but it's the truth enough for you to have a good idea of how things are working in Matrix. So the agenda today is going to be pretty simple. First, we're going to start with the basics, what chatting on Matrix looks like. Then we are going to follow up with how it looks like behind the scenes, with a comparison with email, which I find pretty fitting to understand how things work. Then we are going to cover who is in control in room. So it's going to be to give you an overview of what one can or cannot do in a Matrix room and how it's enforced. So again, we are not going to go into the details of how it's enforced from a technical perspective, but from an end user perspective, how it looks like. I'm going then to show you what spaces look like, because they are pretty useful to get organized, either as an individual or as an organization, whether you're a formal or informal organization. And then we are going to conclude with upcoming things that are exciting in the Matrix universe. So first things first, chatting on Matrix. This is what a Matrix room looks like. So it's very basic. We have people in the same room. I can type in a message and I can send that message. So Because I'm a very imperfect being, I sometimes make mistakes, so I can edit them. So that's one of the nice features when coming from IRC specifically. You can edit messages. You do not have to do that s/syntax, which is great. But it's not the only thing we can do. We can kick users. For example, we are in a tea lovers club room with a few other people, and then somebody is telling us that he's having a cup of chicory, which is obviously unbearable for us tea lovers. So I'm going to kick him to ask him to stop doing that. I can specify a reason and click on kick to get him kicked. And then he's just no longer in the members of the room. Then he managed to find his way back in the room and insists on profanity because he's now telling us that coffee is the best anyway, which is clearly abuse in a tea lover's room. So I can ban him so he can no longer join the room. So I click on his profile, click on ban, and I can add a reason why I'm banning him. He should learn to behave better if he wants to get back in that room. Another interesting thing is that I can also remove the message. And I think it's Mozilla people were super happy about it when they talked about moderation. Moderation on Matrix is very good because not only you can prevent the abusers from abusing again, you can also remove the abuse. So here, Adrian told us that coffee is the best anyway, and nobody in that room can stand that because it's obviously a lie. So we are going to remove the message that would be offending people. I can just click on the message and click on remove, maybe give a reason for the removal of the message, and then it's removed. Nobody can see the message again. That's it. And that's fairly simple, I think, but still quite powerful. Um, let's see how it works in practice, but first let's take a step back and see how email works, because it's something that's quite close and most of us know how email works. So in our example, we are going to have Alice, Bob, and Chris, three persons. They all have a different server for their email. For example, Alice is on Gmail, Bob is on kde.org, and Chris is on gnome.org. They do have different clients. Alice and Chris use Outlook, and Bob uses Apple Mail. So they have different clients, but still can talk together. How the conversation happens. So Alice is going to draft an email on her client, and she's going to send the email. Her client is going to talk to Gmail server to tell I want to send that email to Bob and Chris. Gmail is going to, so the Gmail server is going to pass the email address of Bob and Chris and see that they have kde.org and gnome.org in their email address. So it's going to send the email to the KDE server and to the GNOME server, which are kde.org and gnome.org. Then Bob and Chris are going at some point in the day get behind their computer or their smartphone, and they are going to launch their email client. And the email client is going to ask the server, do you have any new mail for me? And the server is going to give them the new message. And we now have an email thread. The same thing can happen with Matrix. So we have Alice, Bob, and Chris. They are all using a different provider. So Alice is on matrix.org, which is also a Matrix server. Bob is on kde.org, which is also a KDE Matrix server, and Chris is on GNOME's Matrix server, gnome.org. So Alice is using a client, which is called Fractal, and Bob and Chris are both using Element, and they can all talk together. So Alice is going to go in a room with Bob and Chris, and she's going to write down her message. Then she's going to press enter, and her client is going to send the message to her home server. The way her client and the server will communicate is very well defined and is specified, and it's called the client server API, because no need for fancy naming. It's between a client and a server, and it's an API. So it's the client-server API. And every client, whether it's Fractal or Element, is going to send the messages to their home server in the same way by respecting the client-server API. Then Matrix.org is going to see that in the room we have Alice, Bob, and Chris, but Bob and Chris are not on the same home server as Alice. So the Matrix.org server is going to send a notice to KDE's server and to GNOME server that a new message was sent in that room. This is done in a very specific way and specified way too, which is the server-server API, because it's communication between two servers and it's an API, so no need for some fancy naming here either. And then finally, Bob and Chris are going to use their Element client or their Matrix client, whatever it is, to poll their server to see what's happening. And in the same way, they are going to retrieve the new message. So I've been talking about a message here, but actually it's not really a message, it's an event. It's what we call an event in Matrix, because an event can be either a text message, a formatted text, it can be an image, it can be a reply, it can be many things. Now, this might look a bit simple and a bit silly, but it's actually super powerful, because here we can see we have not one single room, but we have three images, three local images of a same room. So it's really decentralized, and it's very easy to send ownership of a room to somebody else, and it's very resilient too, because all the home servers can talk to each other to retrieve all the messages if there were missing fragments of those messages. So we have a few similar concepts between Matrix and email. What we call an event in Matrix is what we call an email in email. On Matrix, we have a room where people can talk, and this is the kind of thing that's called a thread in email, because when several people talk in a same conversation by email, they create a thread. An alias or an address in Matrix would be a mailing list address in email. And finally, we can see that the Matrix ID of a person is built more or less the same way as an email. We have a user ID, and then we have the provider, and we have both. So one thing we could think of is that because there are many local images, it could be a mess, and people could try to take control of the room because they have a copy on their home server, etc. And that's not true, but that's something we are going to cover in the power level section. Before that, we need to cover the matrix specification, which I slightly told you about. If you remember, I told you about the client-server and server-server APIs. And those APIs are part of the matrix specification. And the matrix specification exists to ensure there is only one standardized way to do things. If people want to talk on an encrypted room, their clients will not need to negotiate to understand, does your client support this cipher? And oh well, mine doesn't, so maybe we need to try to find something else. This thing does not exist with Matrix because there is only one way to do things. So encryption is either supported or not, and if it's supported, it's done only in one way. And that specification is open and public, which means everyone can read the specification and implement either the client or server. But everyone can also bring changes to the specification. So of course, there are a few safeguards to prevent people from doing silly things with the specification, and it's guarded by the spec core team. The process is pretty simple. It starts with a great ID, and the person who has a nice ID to extend the matrix specification to add, for example, I'm going to say something silly because it's already in the spec, but to add a location event. For example, I don't want to send text, but I want to send my my coordinates on a map so people can find me. So that's a great idea, and I started a discussion, and I got a feedback. So people are going to tell me what they think about that and how it should be implemented. I'm going to take feedback and amend my proposition. Then I'm going to work on an implementation, because to get added to the matrix specification, all proposals need to have a working implementation to show that it does work in practice and it's not just a fancy dream. Then the person who made the proposal is going to ask a review from the spec core team. The spec core team will then review, well, one member of the spec core team is going to review the proposal, and if it has concerns, it can add comments and ask for more details. Before moving to the next step, we need a working implementations. If we have a working implementation and the person from the spec core team doesn't have any outstanding concern, they can mark it ready for the final comments period. So the final comments period is a 5 days period during which any member of the spec core team can raise a concern. A concern will completely block the FCP, final comments period, and the specification change will not be able to go any further. If there are no concern and the 5 days are done, the proposal will be merged. Will be merged in the specification. So it's in reality there are a few more steps, but from a conceptual perspective, this is what's going to happen. And at the end of the 5 days, if there are no concerns, the proposal is merged, but if there are concerns, they can still be solved. And if there are outstanding concerns that are going to take too much rework of the initial proposal, then the FCP can be cancelled entirely. So everybody can change their spec and do so in a safe way that doesn't damage completely the protocol. If you want to have a full look at how the process looks like, on that slide I added the URL to the actual process, or you can flash the QR code if you want to look at the process itself. But let's get back to the end user perspective, more to the one-on-one aspect of that session. It's who is in control. When we have several people in the room, there needs to be somebody who can enforce decision. If somebody is abusing, if we have an abuser who is, I don't know, spamming or trolling, it should be able to kick them out or to ban them. And for that, we have power levels. When somebody creates a room, they have the power level 100 by default. A power level is an integer between 0 and 100. It's 100 for the creator and 0 for new joiners. And that power level is going to tell the home servers what you can or cannot do. A few examples. When you join a room that already exists, that you are not the creator by default, so all those values are defaults that can be changed. If you have the power level 0, you can send messages or invite other people in the room. If you are a moderator, so you have the power level 50, you can kick people, ban people, you can redact messages, and you can notify the whole room by using @room, which is going to send a noisy notifications to everyone in the room. And finally, if you are the administrator of the room, you have the power level 100. You can change the primary address of a room. So a room can have an alias to be more easily found. So it's pretty much the same as a mailing list address, email address. Now, how power level work is that it's an integer between 0 and 100, and you can promote people who have a lower power level than you, but you cannot demote people who have the same power level as you or a power level that is inferior. So for example, I created a room. We're going to take the top left example. I created a room. There is new joiner. I'm PL 100. They are PL 0. I can promote them. If I'm the room owner and somebody is a moderator and actually I'm no longer interested in the room, or I want to share ownership of the room with them, I can promote them to PL 100 and we both will be PL 100. If I'm a moderator and there is a new joiner, I can raise their power level to 50 or to 49 or to 30. I can raise their power level so they can do more in the room. But if I have the power level 100 and I had promoted somebody to the same power level as me, PL 100, I cannot demote them. So everyone can change the power level of people who have a strictly inferior level, but it's something that needs to be done with care. If we take an example, we have Alice, who is the creator of the room fun at matrix.org. And there are a few people who are abusers, and she needs help to fight spam. So she asks Bob, who has the PL0, to help her. So she promotes him to power level 100. And it turns out that Bob was not the nice person she thought he would be. So he can rename the room, he can change the address, he can change it to evil.garbage.com, and he can even promote his friends admin too. And it's complete chaos, and Alice can do nothing about it. Now, if Alice had promoted Bob to the power level 50, Bob could have done a few things like kicking a few people or maybe changing the room address or doing a few not so nice things, but Alice could have demoted Bob, and Bob could not have promoted people actually admin but moderators too, because he could only promote his friends to power level 50, the same as his. So really, in public rooms, the only people who own the room should have the power level 100 because it gives you a lot of responsibilities and you cannot take it back from somebody. Let's now cover spaces, and we have three kind of spaces. The first one is public spaces. So public spaces, here you can see a screenshot of the Matrix community. So it's the space maintained by the Matrix Foundation, in which we have all the rooms of Matrix related projects. So we have chat clients, non-chat clients, servers, etc. And as you can see in the right part of the screenshot, we have several rooms. So it's a sort of public directory, but that can have hierarchies, and which makes it really easier for people to join and discover new rooms and to make sure that the room is actually belonging to a given community. Another interesting one is restricted spaces. This one is especially interesting for organizations, whether they are formal or informal. And I think the easiest bit here is to show you an example. So I took the example of Goblin's INC, which is in the business of stealing and selling socks for profit. I created a restricted space, and in that space, I added three rooms: strategy, stock stonks, sorry, and sock ops. So the strategy to know what's happening, and the sock stonks to have indicators, and finally the ops one to drive the operations and see how we are doing stealing and selling socks. I then invited the chief goblin, who is going to help us with strategy. Now, this screenshot is showing us the view from the Chief Goblin perspective. So in the left, he got an invite to the Goblin INC space. He can just accept the invite, and then he can see the three rooms, the three private rooms that I created and that nobody who is not in that space can see. And he can just click on join on a room and he'll be in a room. And so by doing this, I granted access to all those rooms just by adding him to a space instead of doing it on a room per room basis, which would have been pretty cumbersome. And then we have private spaces. Private spaces are a way to organize rooms just for yourself. So in this example, I created the Matrix plus Rust space. It's not public one, it's just a private one, and I added two rooms, the Fractal and the Matrix Rust SDK room. It's not exhaustive because I should have added, for example, the Conduit room. So Conduit is a home server for Matrix written in Rust, but it's a private space and it's just for the room I want to focus on. So I do not need to have it super exhaustive. Now we have seen that we can use Matrix to chat, we can use Matrix to chat safely, we can use Matrix to organize the different rooms we are in and to give access to people. So what are some cool things that are going to happen? The most exciting one is speed and performance and improvements in the name of SyncV3. So SyncV3 is a new API that will allow clients to retrieve only the most critical information they need to display to the user and then to gather all the information behind that. So it's going to make clients much more reactive when they talk with the home servers. Another interesting one is Subspaces. Um, I showed you spaces, which are just one group of rooms. So this is fully supported. And Subspaces are still in beta right now, but they mostly work. It just needs a bit of polish, but honestly, they do work and we do rely on them. Subspaces are just nested spaces, so even better to organize rooms together and to give access to different rooms. P2p Matrix is an exciting one, and it's actually not just P2p Matrix, but also portable identities. The goal behind P2p Matrix is to get rid of home servers as we know them. Actually, the goal is to shrink the home server to be so small that it can be a part of your client. And we do have working implementations of P2P Matrix. I strongly encourage you to have a look at Neil Alexander's talk on matrix.org channel on YouTube on P2P Matrix. It was about a year ago that he gave his talk, but a lot have changed, but many things, the general concepts remain true. The technicalities might have changed, but the main concepts remain true. And finally, one very interesting aspect I see with Matrix is moderation and the law. Matrix is about social good. It's not just a technical solution to a technical problem. It's about connecting people, as a company used to say. It's about connecting people together and make sure they can work together, they can have a nice conversation together. So there is work going on to make moderation tools more efficient. And there is also work done on the side of the law. There is a coalition for competitive digital market launched by Element, and that's done because Matrix is an open system and interoperable by nature. So it needs an open ecosystem to thrive. So it's in the interest of companies working with Matrix to be in an open ecosystem, to have influence on the law behind them, around them. And the goal of that coalition is to make sure that the EU is a fertile soil for interoperability. So to make sure that, for example, the giants provide APIs that we can consume to bridge with them. And I invite you to watch the talk by Will on bridges at ComCon in a few days to have a good view of what bridges are and how important they are. if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thib. Sorry about the AV issues at the beginning of that. So I'm going to bring in Thib. Say thank you very much, Thib, and thank you very much, Matrix and Element, for sponsoring ComCon again and helping make the whole thing happen. So we've got lots of talks from Matrix over the next couple of days. Well, Matrix/Element over the next couple of days. So my question to you would be, what are you most looking forward to over from your sessions over the next couple of days? And that's a difficult question to answer because your boss has one of those sessions.
Yes, actually, I'm looking really forward to the Bridges talk first because it's sort of the follow-up of my talk. So I covered the basics with the Matrix 101, and one of the core principles of Matrix is interoperability, which is a very difficult word to say. And Bridges is one core concept about that. It's really about getting to talk to all services. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that talk. And then, of course, we have the talk by Matthew, which is about encrypted, decentralized, cascading, group, native Matrix voice and video calls. In short, it's native Matrix group calls, which is, a really exciting product, which is going to be a bit separate from Element at start. But it's an exciting product, and I can't wait to see everyone playing with that.
As someone that's already seen these talks, they're both brilliant talks. So I can't wait, especially the bridging one, because for me, bridging is like the key thing for Matrix. So I want to say thank you very much to you again for giving your talk and again for sponsoring. Literally, you're powering all the asynchronous chat and the community as a whole. So thank you very much. So we are going to come off here for just a minute, and then we'll be back for our next session. See you soon.